It began with a scream that echoed through the hollows of Arkansas in the dead of a summer night, swallowed almost immediately by the dense pines. Locals say no one ever saw her again. Sarah Whitlock, the young bride, vanished from the parlor of the Whitlock estate, leaving behind a shattered window, a torn veil, and a silence heavier than the humid air. The people whispered, some too afraid to speak aloud, that something unnatural had clawed its way into their town. The truth, however, was far worse. Hidden in the shadows of small-town piety, beneath the polished sermons and Sunday hymns, the bones of corruption ran deep. This was not an ordinary disappearance. It was a transgression sanctioned by blood, by family, and by the twisted interpretations of righteousness. Behind closed doors, a patriarch had decided to rewrite love, to steal what was never his, and to punish a son for daring to possess happiness. To understand what happened, we must descend into the layers of fear that cloaked Pine Hollow, a town that thrived on obedience and whispered secrets, where every family carried its own quiet rot. Here, the ordinary masqueraded as sacred, and the sacred was often a lie. Sarah's story, and the darkness she confronted, was only the beginning. Pine Hollow was a town as much defined by its forest as by its people. Moss-laden trees bent over dirt roads, their roots twisting like the gnarled hands of unseen watchers. Families had lived there for generations, their lives intertwined with the church, the orphanage, and the plantation homes that lined the riverbanks. Gossip moved faster than the horse-drawn carriages, but it never reached the outside world. Inside homes, behind closed shutters, people hid debts, sins, and obsessions. The Whitlocks were one of the town's most prominent families, a lineage traced to men who built their wealth and power on both labor and secrets. John Whitlock, the patriarch, was a man whose public piety masked a rigid cruelty. His sermons spoke of virtue and devotion, yet his private life operated under a different law entirely, one that demanded obedience and punished desire. His son, Samuel, had fallen in love with Sarah Whitlock, a young woman of uncommon beauty and intelligence. Their union was celebrated openly, a union that seemed to promise hope and continuation of the family line. But in the corners of the Whitlock estate, whispers circulated about forbidden desires, about a father's obsession with control. These whispers would soon materialize into a horror that the town could not fully comprehend, a moral transgression wrapped in the guise of family honor. Sarah was 17, sharp-witted, and possessed a quiet defiance that made her both admired and feared. Her presence seemed to illuminate the dim halls of the Whitlock estate, drawing the attention of those who had spent generations lurking in shadows. Samuel's love for her was immediate, almost instinctual, a connection forged not just through affection but through an unspoken recognition of shared yearning for autonomy. Sarah, however, carried the weight of her own family's expectations. Her mother's eyes, always alert, seemed to follow her in ways both tender and suffocating. Every movement, every choice was scrutinized as if freedom were a sin. And yet, Sarah had learned to navigate these pressures with an elegance that masked a simmering awareness. Her life was not entirely her own. The arrival of her wedding day, meant to seal her autonomy and happiness, instead became a stage for the unimaginable. John Whitlock, seeing the union as a threat to his dominion, resolved to insert himself into the narrative. He believed that the right to dictate the lives of others, especially those within his household, was divinely sanctioned. This conviction would manifest in a way so terrifying, so psychologically corrosive, that the town itself would become a witness to a moral eclipse, an event that historians would later omit, as if shame and horror could erase a crime of the heart. Pine Hollow's church was more than a sanctuary. It was a fortress of authority. Its congregation included nearly every family in town, each bound by ritual and fear. Nearby, the orphanage, operated by the church, housed children whose parents had succumbed to disease, debt, or misfortune. The orphanage was nominally a place of refuge, but the children whispered of harsh discipline, midnight punishments, and the strange watchfulness of the clergy. They spoke of unseen figures in dark robes moving silently through hallways, carrying implements whose purpose was never fully understood. These same hands, they would say, carried both blessing and punishment. It was a world where obedience was absolute, where questioning led to isolation, where fear intertwined with faith until the two became indistinguishable. John Whitlock navigated these institutions with an ease born of influence. He was a man who understood that power is most absolute when it is invisible, when it is enshrined in ritual and reinforced by collective belief. His desire to take Sarah for himself was not merely personal. It was emblematic of a system that allowed men to bend morality, to twist faith, to subsume the agency of others under the guise of divine providence. What unfolded in the Whitlock estate was therefore both intimate and systemic, a horror that fused familial obsession with institutional complicity. The night of the wedding, the air was heavy with heat and tension. Lanterns flickered in the hallways, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters on the walls. Guests had gathered in celebration, unaware that the patriarch's obsession would soon unravel the lives before them. Samuel, dressed in a suit that barely contained his nervous energy, waited for Sarah at the altar of the family chapel. She appeared radiant, yet her eyes flickered with uncertainty, an intuition that something unseen hovered in the corners of the estate. John Whitlock, concealing his intent beneath a mask of paternal pride, approached them. In an act that shocked the congregation, he forcibly claimed Sarah, invoking a twisted notion of paternal right and divine mandate. The room erupted into confusion and horror, but his authority, reinforced by generations of social and religious domination, silenced dissent. Sarah's screams, muffled yet unmistakable, were swallowed by the thick walls of the chapel. Samuel, powerless, could only watch as the man who should have been a guide and protector transformed into an instrument of violation. What had begun as love was extinguished in the shadow of tyranny, leaving behind a psychological scar that would haunt the town, the family, and history itself. The chapel fell silent after the incident, yet the echoes lingered: Sarah's terror, Samuel's despair, the congregation's stunned complicity. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, humid and suffocating, as if nature itself recoiled from the act. Whispers traveled from house to house. Did you see it? Did it really happen? Yet no one dared speak openly. The town had a pact, unspoken yet absolute. Some truths were too dangerous to name. Samuel withdrew into the shadows of the Whitlock estate, haunted by visions of his bride in the patriarch's grasp. Sleep offered no reprieve. Dreams twisted into grotesque versions of the night, where lanterns burned without flame and figures moved with impossible speed. Sarah, meanwhile, disappeared from public view. Some claimed she had been sent to a convent in the mountains. Others suggested a darker fate, whispered in trembling tones, that John had confined her, using faith and fear as shackles. The family, the town, and the church became silent witnesses to a crime that was both intimate and systemic, a collision of paternal tyranny, patriarchal dominance, and religious complicity. History would not remember this night, yet the psychological residue persisted, shaping Pine Hollow's collective conscience for generations. Samuel became a ghost within his own home. He wandered the corridors in silence, listening to the creak of floorboards as if expecting Sarah's presence behind every door. Friends and neighbors attempted to console him, but grief in Pine Hollow was a private, almost forbidden ritual. His mind became a theater of torment, replaying the wedding day with obsessive clarity. Each detail, the sway of the veil, the gleam of lantern light, the father's cold eyes, etched deeper into his psyche. Sleep became a battleground. Nightmares blurred with memory, and soon he could not distinguish reality from hallucination. Townsfolk noticed the change. Once vibrant, now hollow, Samuel drifted through the marketplace and the church with a vacant stare. His despair was both visible and invisible, a living testament to the town's collective silence. Rumors swirled of a hidden wing in the Whitlock estate, a place forbidden even to servants. Locked doors, carved with strange symbols, supposedly led to rooms where unspeakable rituals had taken place. Children who delivered messages to the estate claimed to hear soft cries behind the walls, always dismissed as wind or imagination. In truth, the wing contained the machinery of control. Hidden locks, iron chains, and rooms designed to enforce obedience. Sarah, it was later whispered, had spent weeks in that wing, subjected to psychological manipulation. Her resistance hardened her mind even as it broke her body. The wing became a symbol of terror in Pine Hollow, representing the unbridgeable gap between what the world permitted and what the Whitlocks commanded. Pine Hollow was a town bound by fear, faith, and reputation. Citizens who suspected the truth often looked away. The social cost of interference was too high. Gossip was weaponized, and questioning authority was equated with sacrilege. The church, the orphanage, and local government all participated in a tacit cover-up, reinforcing the Whitlocks' power. Fear became a currency. Silence, a tool of survival. The psychological toll on the town was profound. Children learned early that desire was dangerous. Women were cautioned against autonomy, and men internalized the need to assert dominance at all costs. The collective conscience of Pine Hollow was a haunted mirror, reflecting the horrors it refused to acknowledge. Months later, fragments of letters surfaced, written in Sarah's small, precise hand. Hidden beneath floorboards, they described her suffering with stark clarity. The endless isolation, the cold sermons used to manipulate her, the psychological torment inflicted by her captor. Each sentence was a map of trauma, a testament to resilience under duress. She wrote not just to Samuel, but to an imagined audience, as if speaking the truth aloud could break the chains of fear. The letters circulated quietly, passing from servant to servant, never reaching the broader town. Each word was a forbidden knowledge, a glimpse into the machinery of control wielded by a single man under the guise of divine right. By 1889, Samuel's body and mind had begun to betray him. Anxiety consumed him, phobias rooted in the Whitlock estate, where even a flickering shadow could trigger panic. Insomnia drove him to wander the pines at night, listening to imagined cries. Villagers noted the flicker of madness in his eyes, the way he muttered to unseen figures, the tremor in his hands when he spoke of Sarah. Trauma in Pine Hollow was contagious. The town itself seemed to vibrate with unacknowledged horror, as though the pines themselves held memory of the events. The church maintained a veneer of sanctity, but its altars concealed complicity. Clergy who had witnessed John Whitlock's tyranny offered no intervention, rationalizing their silence as obedience to divine order. Sermons became coded warnings. Speak not of forbidden acts, question not the patriarch. The psychological manipulation extended beyond the estate, embedding itself into the moral framework of the town. Faith became indistinguishable from fear. Pine Hollow's children grew up knowing that disobedience could erase not just happiness, but life itself. One evening, Samuel, emboldened by grief and desperation, attempted to confront his father. He entered the estate quietly, the air thick with humidity and foreboding. He found the hidden wing, the doors cold under his touch, chains and implements gleaming in candlelight. But John Whitlock anticipated rebellion. The confrontation was brutal in its psychological intensity. The father invoked tradition, faith, and bloodline, each argument a blade to Samuel's resolve. Samuel left physically unharmed but psychologically shattered, realizing that resistance within the system was meaningless. The machinery of control was larger than a single act of defiance. Sarah disappeared completely in the following year. Official records cited a convent transfer or boarding in a distant relative's home, but eyewitnesses spoke of shadows moving in the windows, a carriage leaving the estate at night. Her absence became an unspoken truth, a wound that pulsed quietly in the town's collective memory. Samuel wandered through the empty spaces she once occupied, the house itself seeming to breathe, to murmur, to conspire. The estate developed a reputation for being haunted. Lights flickered in empty rooms, footsteps echoed in hallways where no one walked, and cold drafts whispered like the voices of the silenced. Locals said that Sarah's spirit lingered in the hidden wing, tethered by the injustice done to her. Some swore to see a figure in white watching from windows, while others reported hearing chains rattling in empty rooms. The haunting was not only supernatural. It was a manifestation of unresolved psychological terror, an imprint of trauma on both place and people. The Whitlocks' corruption seeped into subsequent generations. Children born into the family carried both the legacy of power and the shadow of guilt. Fear and control were inherited traits, manifesting as obsession, emotional repression, and cruelty. The town itself bore these scars. Families passed down whispered rules about obedience, women internalized subjugation, and men learned that love was secondary to dominance. Pine Hollow became a repository of unresolved psychological horror, a living museum of human transgression disguised as social order. A diary surfaced decades later, belonging to a servant who had witnessed John Whitlock's tyranny. The entries detailed not just Sarah's imprisonment but also the subtle manipulations used on the townsfolk. Veiled threats, clandestine punishments, and orchestrated public displays of moral authority. The diary revealed a pattern of exploitation, a system that reinforced itself through fear and secrecy. The Whitlock legacy was revealed not through legal records, but through fragments of human memory, scribbled in fear, never intended to be discovered. In the 20th century, historians stumbled upon fragments of letters, diaries, and local anecdotes. Piecing them together revealed a story of familial obsession, institutional complicity, and psychological terror. Scholars recognized the patterns familiar to students of trauma: enforced power, secrecy, and the erasure of victims. Yet much remained unknowable. The final fate of Sarah, the full extent of the hidden wing, and the precise methods of manipulation used by John Whitlock. The story became a cautionary tale of what happens when power goes unchecked, and when fear is allowed to dictate morality. Pine Hollow continued, outwardly ordinary, but the psychological imprint remained. Families carried silent rules. Children learned early that obedience outweighed justice. The estate, now abandoned, whispered the truth of its past to anyone who dared listen. Corridors filled with shadows, windows reflecting what had been lost. Silence became a form of control, a means of preserving power across generations. The horror of the forbidden marriage, the patriarch's transgression, was not merely historical. It was an ongoing force, embedded in place, memory, and culture. The story of Sarah Whitlock and her stolen marriage is not simply a tale of individual cruelty. It is a testament to the destructive power of secrecy, authority, and fear. In Pine Hollow, love was subverted, obedience enforced, and truth buried beneath layers of institutional and familial complicity. The psychological, spiritual, and emotional reverberations persisted, haunting not only the estate but the town itself. As the pines sway in the humid Arkansas breeze, they seem to murmur reminders. Some acts of corruption cannot be erased, some horrors are inherited, and some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, will find a way to surface. History may have forgotten Sarah Whitlock, but the echoes of her suffering linger, a spectral warning of what happens when power and fear intertwine.